Hi, and thank you for joining me for this session. This is a discussion on the Aphrodite Callings, meaning we're going to be talking about the way that Aphrodite calls out to her people and what that might look like and how she's calling us to interact with the world on her behalf. All right, hope you're ready. Let's get started. Okay, so I want to start off by saying that first and foremost, I think that Aphrodite is one of the most famous forgotten goddesses, meaning the people know of her, but very few actually take the time to get to know her on a deep level. They have an image in their mind of what they think that she is, and they never question if that's the full picture. So before we go further, I want to ask you the question, what do you think of when you hear the name Aphrodite? And just sort of sit with that and hold that as we move forward. So some of the more unremembered attributes, sort of the overlooked attributes that are really highly associated with this goddess, if we look at the literature, if we look at the epithets, the cult titles that she had, if we look at the ways that she was worshipped and we look at the stories that are around her, she's so much more than the goddess of love. Although saying so much more than the goddess of love is a bit of a weird statement because love is so big, and it is so encompassing of so many different kinds of ideas that we just really don't have great language for. But she's also the goddess of cleansing. She is a goddess of childbirth. She's associated with blessing marriages, and with women's rites of passage. She's very much associated with war and battle, and especially in her earlier depictions, we see her very much associated with war and battle. And even in things like the Homeric corpus, we see her associated with war and battle, maybe not as successfully as Athena, who definitely sort of strikes a counterpoint to Aphrodite in that realm. But that was partially too because they were on opposite sides of the battle, and Athena specifically asked, fighters like Diomedes to go after her. She's associated with death and rebirth. And these are really deep and profound associations too. We see her as both a mourner in those situations, and also in her mother aspect, we see her associated with death and rebirth. She's highly linked to the season of spring and to that sort of rebirth and rejuvenation that happens, in the physical world around us. And she is a goddess of creation. Creativity and just the act of creation are part of what the ancients considered part of the work of love. Bringing forth new life, bringing forth new ideas, bringing things together, everything together to create. So she's more than a love goddess. When we call on deities we don't fully understand, we're really likely to have some very strange results. And most non-Hellenic pagans and polytheists call on her really only in romance workings. They call on her for things that have to do with love and sexuality as we envision it in this modern era. And that isn't giving her short shrift. That is just not all of what she is, all of what she does. We have talked in another session about how Aphrodite is calling her people. And you may be feeling that call within your life. So she's calling people from different traditions. You might be coming from a Wicca or a witchcraft background. those are not the same thing, but I put them together because you may be coming from that type of background. You may be coming from Hellenismos specifically. Hellenismos is Hellenic polytheistic spirituality. So you may be coming from that kind of very Greek culture, Greek ritual, Greek religion focus. She's also calling to non-pagan. So maybe as you're watching this, you don't identify as pagan, you don't identify as polytheist. And yet she's showing up in your life and you feel really moved to interact with her at least and to discover what's happening. She's also calling to lots of different types of people. So there's no specific age that I'm seeing as I'm interacting with people coming to me seeking connection. There's not one particular age group, it's young people, it's older people, it's very solidly middle-aged people. It's the whole spectrum. There's no specific race, no specific gender, no specific cultural background that these people are coming from, that you are coming from. There's not a lot that we share always in common in terms of our backgrounds. We have different professions and different upbringings and, live in different parts of the world. And we don't always necessarily have the same personality traits. I mean, I think if you try to think of what an Aphrodisian person is like, there might be some things that you think would be in common. And there probably are on a deep level, but not necessarily at a superficial glance. And I would also say that she's calling us for different reasons. She wants different things from different people that she's calling. So then questions that we need to ask ourselves and questions that this lecture, that this discussion is aimed to start thinking about is, what does she want from the people that she's calling out to? And what are we, as those people, expected to do? What are we supposed to be doing? How can we interact with her in that way? So one of the questions that I think comes up here is, why would a goddess need us? Right? Why would a divine being need humans at all? So I'm going to share a little bit of my personal view on this topic, and you may be coming from a different sort of metaphysical place than I'm coming from, but here's how I see it. See if this resonates with you. A god or a goddess, a deity, is essentially energy and spirit that feeds on energy, spirit that needs energy. We all need energy, right? No matter how enfleshed we are. We need food and water and these sort of chemical reactions that happen within our bodies. They all produce energy, and we need that to survive and to move forward and to do anything, even just exist. So if we understand the world around us and understand the spiritual world around us, that it all moves on this energy spectrum, Aphrodite as a goddess exists as a spiritual being who needs energy, as do we. We are the same in that regard. Our thoughts and our actions and our words all equal types of energy, and there's more to it than that, right? Like there are more kinds of energy than that, but that's essentially what's happening. So we end up being mutually supportive of each other if we're engaged in relationship with really anything in our world. We're exchanging energy with each other in order to sustain and support and survive and thrive. So what happens when a deity is not being praised and honored? What happens if they're not even being remembered? It's difficult to say, think of deities whose names we've forgotten, but think about the idea. We know that there are deities that we have, archaeological evidence for, we have historical evidence that something existed in that space, but we don't have their names. We don't know what their attributes were. We don't know anything about them. And then there have to be others, plenty of others, that we don't even know that there's a hole that they would fit into, that they're just completely outside of human thought and memory at this stage. And also another question to think about is what happens when they're not remembered accurately. When the history or the mythology, the press, the PR, the hype that's around them is not what they were about, not what they would want to be considered to be about. And I would posit that a deity in this position loses some of their power, that they possibly even cease to exist. And also that deities in this situation, for instance, not being remembered accurately, change. At least they are perceived so differently by mortals that a part of what they were is no longer accessible to us. If we can't remember something, if we can't see it, if we can't touch it, if we don't know to reach out to it, then that part kind of gets cut off from the world. It may still exist there for the deity, but it's not part of what's being fed and being nurtured and being shared. So I see this as really a very real and current risk for a goddess like Aphrodite, since so many people in the world think that they know her and think that she is vapid and vain and shallow and mean-spirited and petty. And she's so far from that. She's so not like that, but that's how we see her get perpetuated in pop culture. So Aphrodite is calling to people in our modern world. And if you're here watching this video, I'm going to guess that she's calling to you on some level. And she's calling us to do what I've sort of narrowed down as 3 different things: to see her, to honor her, and to serve her. And each of these things build on each other. And she's not necessarily calling all of us to do all 3 things. Maybe she's just calling on you to see her as she is, to recognize her, to value and appreciate her. Having done that, it's difficult, I think, not to move into a place of honoring her. If you see her for what she is, it's hard not to love her for what she is. I think it's impossible. But we have to see her in order to honor her. We have to understand her, and we have to seek to understand her. We have to dive into those mysteries and to study her symbols and, to really immerse ourselves in what she is, if we're going to give her proper honor. If we're going to honor her for who she is, then we have to see her fully. And certainly if we've been called to service of any type, meaning that there's work to be done, then we're going to have to honor her as a part of that. We're going to also, it goes without saying, but I'm going to say it anyway, because I'm a fan of saying obvious things just to drive the point home. If we're going to serve her, if we're called into service, not only must we honor her, but we have to see her as she is. And allow her to sort of reveal herself in our lives. So that first one, seeing her, I'm going to call the call to sight. We're going to refer to that as the call to sight. And as for that sight, I feel like Aphrodite is maybe a little tired of being ignored, a little tired of the bad press, or at least the incomplete press, that she's being depicted in these very shallow and self-serving ways. and that's, again, really the opposite of what she's about. She's deep as the ocean, and she is the epitome of giving oneself in love to another or many others, or even to the world. And I feel like that she's tired, that because she's tired of being ignored, that comes across in the workings that I've done with her as being saddened, as being frustrated, maybe a little impatient, and really sort of feeling taken for granted and taken advantage of by people who are working with her only to get something, using her energy in those romance workings only, and not seeking to understand her on a deeper level. I think that feels bad. It just feels bad. So I have seen her for the last several years as practically yelling and throwing things to get noticed, but maybe not in that like temper tantrum sort of way, just the like, lobbing an apple across your field of vision so that you know that something's there, know that she's there, throwing roses in order to get your attention. This is definitely true on unseen planes, this rattling windows and doors of sort of a person's psyche in order to have attention drawn to her so that she can share who she is and what she has so bountifully as her gifts. And she's shaking out people's worlds in order to get their attention, in order to have them see the majesty and the power, the deep mystery of love on all the levels that she brings it. I feel like she wants to be known in fullness, especially among those who claim or try to work with her. If you're using Aphrodite's name, she wants you to get her. She wants you to know who she is. The power or the strength of love is sort of a mission critical message, that this is what she wants people to understand, is that love can change a person fundamentally. Love can change a relationship, and love can change the face of the world if we're willing to let it do so. And I think on some levels that's a scary thing. I think that there are plenty of people in this world who specifically try to keep love out of the equation, and try to set up ways in which we're not experiencing each other around the world as lovable. Because if we love each other, we can't do the really harmful and damaging things to each other. And as part of this knowing her in fullness, I think she also would like to reclaim a very recognized place of importance. Who wouldn't? And she was such an important goddess in the ancient world, that if we allowed her to take a greater place of importance in our world, I think we'd have a different experience of this life. So these are some of the things that I'm seeing in that call to sight, that call to have people just see her for what she is and recognize her. And then that can lead to the call to honor her. So gods, and I've spelled it here with 2 Ds. This is something that Irisanya Moon sort of brought to my attention in her book on Aphrodite, actually. That I'm using it as sort of a gender neutral expression of deity. So when I say gods with 2 Ds, I'm talking about gods and goddesses, any sort of deific being. So gods of all religions require and value devotion. I think that they need it in order to sustain themselves. And I think that they love and really genuinely value it. We see lots of examples of devotees of a deity being very special in the world of that deity and in the world around them, really even being sort of marked out as being special because of their love and their devotion for that deity. And what I'm talking about when I say devotion is sort of an active recognition, active praise, active engaging with that deity in ways that I think within pagan culture and polytheistic culture, we don't always have really good words for, or we sort of reject and have weird feelings about words like praise, honor, worship, and even devotion. And we have to maybe come into a different relationship with those words in order to engage fully with these beings, with these deities. I don't believe that Aphrodite is asking for submission. I don't think that that's what worship is. I think that she is asking for love in that active sense, not just as something that you feel, but love as something that you do. And that this is that energy that we were talking about. Part of the honoring equation is an idea of reciprocity. So reciprocity is fundamental in the ancient view of religion. This, and especially we see it a lot within Greek religion, but not just Greek religion. It's everywhere in the ancient world. The relationships between gods and mortals were symbiotic and reciprocal. They weren't necessarily even in the ancient world. And that may be a place where things are different today because we as humans are different today. But symbiotic, they rely on each other. They both benefit from being in that relationship. And again, reciprocal. The idea of I do for you and you do for me. We do for each other. Not because, oh, you did that thing, so now I have to repay you by doing something for you. That's not what we're talking about. What we're talking about is the idea of, oh, you know, that person that's always just does nice things. They always give me compliments. You know, they always save me a seat, you know, at the meeting or whatever. They're going to be first on your mind to do similar things back for them. And really, if you think about it, if you get down into it, human relationships, you know, our relationships with each other are very much this way. We just have gotten away from talking about that reciprocity because we've been told that that sounds manipulative, I think, is part of the negative connotations that are around this for a lot of people in the modern world. And that we are told that we should just do without any kind of expectation of gaining anything in return. When I was part of the Christian church as a child and a very young adult, before I found my way to paganism, I remember, you know, being told that a lot, that there's this idea that you just give, you just do, because that it's your duty. You are obligated to do that. And that you might not have anything in return. And I think in some ways that there's something to be said for that, right? That we shouldn't do things for each other just to try to like put coins into the machine and push a button and get out the outcomes that we want. But there is also this sort of understanding, if you just take a step back, that when we are kind to each other, when we are gracious, when we are generous to each other, that inspires kindness and grace and generosity from those same people and from the people around us, and that it's just mutually beneficial on all sorts of levels, right? That's that symbiosis, that reciprocity. Honoring in a Greek context. So it makes sense to honor deities, to honor gods and goddesses in ways that are similar to their original cultural context, if we're able to. If we dig in and understand a little bit about what those look like. That's not to say that our processes and our ways of honoring aren't going to evolve out of that, or that the deity won't evolve out of that, because they do. But that it's very helpful to sort of dig into the ancient ways of doing that in order to establish that connection. There's lots and lots of room for play and adaptation. There's lots of room for growth. There's also lots of room for your culture, your personality, your experience to come through in that. I just have the warning here that too much change can change the deity too. So it's a thing that we have to sort of balance and be listening for, is this okay? As we engage in our honor and celebration. All right, so let's then talk about, as we're talking about honoring and we're talking about devotion, let's talk about the idea of the priestess as an intermediary for the goddess. So in the height of her worship, devotees of Aphrodite made offerings and had contact with Aphrodite through her priestesses. This wasn't necessarily the only way that could happen, but it was the most sort of well-documented way. A devotee or a thiosote, would be one who feels, appreciates, and acknowledges the influence of a deity, any deity. This is not a term that's specific to Aphrodite. And that acknowledgement, when I say they acknowledge the influence of a deity, is going to be acts of offering and worship. They would make offerings and do devotional acts in order to sort of foster and maintain that relationship with Aphrodite or with any deity. So examples of this might include doing things like keeping an altar or a shrine for offerings, like an incense altar, or altars in the ancient world typically were places where offerings were burned, because that was how you took it out of human hands and put it into the hands of the divine, was to make it no longer usable for human consumption, and gave it to them. So really a fire pit that you maintain in order to give your offerings to a deity could be an altar. It's a very different kind of concept from the sort of the neo-pagan, modern pagan context of an altar, where it's really more of a shrine, where you're keeping images and maybe spending time there reflecting on that deity. Although keeping a shrine is also one of those ways to really feel, appreciate, and acknowledge the presence of a deity in your life. Celebrating that deity's holy days or festivals, and each god or goddess had their own days, their own times, their own their own specific moments that we mark in our wheel of time that were sacred to them. Aphrodite's were the fourth day following the new moon, which marked the beginning of the month. And in our local, not local, but contemporary calendar, we might just think of that as the fourth of each month, because we mark our months differently. So you could either go to the lunar calendar and mark it that way, or you could just use the Gregorian calendars that we use now. So the fourth of each month, Fridays, were sacred to her. And then she had several big festivals in different locales throughout Greece. And we've got the benefit of being able to know about those festivals and to see them in a larger context and to be able to pull from each of them. But maybe, if you were an ancient person living in Greece, or a person living in ancient Greece, might be a better way to say that. There might only be one big festival for Aphrodite each year where you lived. Maybe that was called the Aphrodisia. That was a common name for them, but maybe it wasn't. Maybe it was the Hysteria, or the Adonia. Might be the only time that you really experienced a festival in honor of Aphrodite. So we get to choose from those, and we get to honor those holy days, those holidays, those feast days, festival days, in ways that make sense to us where we live, and also for where the goddess is pulling us. And we have the opportunity to connect through a priestess. Now, a lot of us don't literally have this opportunity in our areas because maybe we're the only person that we know who is a devotee or a priestess of Aphrodite. But as her worship grows, as her influence grows in this world, I think that we'll be able to offer these experiences to each other as well, and that we'll have more opportunities for connecting through somebody who is embodying her. And I cannot even tell you enough about what an amazing experience that is from both sides of the equation, to be able to enter the presence of a goddess who is embodied in a person, maybe even a person that you know, but maybe in one that you don't. And it's just phenomenal to be able to be held by the goddess, to be hugged by the goddess, to be looked upon by the goddess in a very direct way. It's profound. All right, so in this little discussion of priestesses, we're gonna bridge that gap, and now we're gonna talk about the call to serve, because some of you that are watching this are undoubtedly being called to serve. And this is not me telling you this. This is just me acknowledging that that has to be a thing for some of you, right? That you're being sort of tapped for that service. And I've said it before, and I'm saying it again. Some, and I think even many people, are being called to do her work. So Aphrodite's work, this list is not exhaustive, but could include things like educating others about her, about her nature, about opportunities to connect with her, etc. That work could include embodying her qualities in daily life, embodying her grace, embodying her sensuality, her passion, her compassion. She might be calling you to organize and lead rituals or festivals to give people the opportunity to celebrate her holy days in community. That's a big thing, and is an opportunity that so many people don't have right now. So maybe you're feeling that sort of tap on your shoulder of, hey, you ritualist, hey, you person, get some folks together, or make this an opportunity that the people in your area could choose to experience and see how they feel about it, see if they like it, see if they want to keep doing it or not. But leading those opportunities for folks. It may also be facilitating Aphrodisian experiences of other types. There's a world full of Aphrodisian joys and pleasures and mysteries and trials and initiations to be had. So maybe that is what you're being called to do. Or embodying her in the hieroskamos, which is the sacred marriage rite. If you feel called to sacred sexuality, this is a very profound way to experience her and to share her with another. Or maybe you're being called to train others. Maybe you've had all of these experiences or a good portion of these experiences, and you're being called to help others realize their potential, and to be able to interact with her in this way. Or maybe there's something else. And I would encourage you, I would love to hear about how those of you that are feeling called to do her work, what that's looking like for you. I've mentioned before in this symposium about the Discord server that we have for the Temple of Aphrodite Asteria. And there's space in there for us to interact. Like, that's the whole point of the Discord server, is for us to interact and talk. So I would love for you to share what your work in her honor looks like. Service to Aphrodite basically means facilitating connections between yourself. Let me start that one again. Service to Aphrodite basically means facilitating connections between yourself and others to Aphrodite and her mysteries. So facilitating connections between yourself and Aphrodite and her mysteries, and between other people and Aphrodite and her mysteries. The question always comes up about formal training in this regard. Does somebody have to undergo formal training in order to be a priestess of Aphrodite? My big answer is no, absolutely not. In fact, very few formal training programs even exist at this time in our world. They just don't exist. But if you like the example that's being made by a particular Hierea, which would be a high priestess, whether, and again, they might not use that term for themselves, but somebody who's leading one of these programs, like Maya in Italy, or Terry, through the Living Love Revolution, or me here at the Temple of Aphrodite Asteria. If you like the example that's being made by that high priestess of that particular temple, school, program, etc., then they may be able to help you get started on this path, right? They are not the one who gives you the stamp of approval. That comes from Aphrodite. But they can help you with the research that they've already begun, with the practices and customs that they already have in place. But there's a path that is laid by a few of us for doing this work. And if that path is calling to you, then that may be a place to start. You can always diverge from that path later if Aphrodite is moving you in a different direction, if your soul is moving you in a different direction. There is room for innovation here, and there's room for more exploration. So I'm going to use my own service as an example, and we've talked a little bit already about my experience with Aphrodite, but we're going to talk specifically about that service right now. So writing has always been a big part of the publicly visible service that I've offered to Aphrodite. I've written fiction books, Temple of Love. I've got Temple of Beauty forthcoming. It is not done yet, but that tells the story of Helen and Clytemnestra as really sort of daughters of Aphrodite, or descendants of Aphrodite, and how they move through the world in a time of horrific conflict, and sort of the challenges and initiations they undergo. I also have written some nonfiction work, Aphrodite's Priestess, Cult of Aphrodite, Wisdom of Love. I've helped to edit a poetry and art collection called Crown of Violets. So writing has been huge in my service. Creating and sharing liturgy or ritual bits has been big, both in the writing of Cult of Aphrodite, which is focused specifically on the ritual parts, but also in leading ritual and bringing those experiences to people. through, big pagan camping festivals and that type of thing at Babylon Rising and Starwood and, other places. So really being able to help people have an embodied experience of honoring her by being present in the ritual. And in Greek ritual, everybody takes part. So by giving them that opportunity, that's been a big piece of my service too. I would say that art and dance have also been very large pieces of what I've been doing or called to do in her service. I spent a period of time as a professional dancer, teaching dance classes and helping folks to have a sort of embodied sensual experience of music and of themselves and of connection with each other. And I always saw that as very Aphrodisian work. And I've also gone through big phases where art takes front and center in my life. And it's almost always Aphrodite that comes through in that art. Sacred sexuality and sex magic have been a part of my practice, have been a part of my calling, both in experiencing and experimenting and learning, but also in leading and facilitating and helping others to have those experiences. I would say that temple building has been part of my calling in her service. Taking care of a shrine. I've been a shrine keeper of multiple Aphrodite shrines, two of them on sort of pagan festival grounds, one at Our Haven Nature Sanctuary in southern Indiana near French Lick, and the other, French Lick. It's just a fun name. And then the other one at Midian, which is in Springville, Indiana. There are shrines in both of those places where I've been the primary shrine keeper to Aphrodite. And there are others that have acted as shrine keepers as well. I'm not alone in that work. I started alone in that work in both places, but it grows. And then there's also the building of the Temple of Aphrodite Asteria, which is not a physical temple at this time, but sort of more of an idea and an etheric place, an online space for Aphrodite's people, and also being involved with the Aphrodisian Collective, which, as I'm filming this, most people will not have heard about, but that is a collective project between multiple priestesses of Aphrodite in order to help connect her community across the globe. And education, really, I think all of this, for me, it always comes back to teaching. I'm a teacher at my very core. And so helping to teach people about Aphrodite and about what Aphrodite work looks like and service and about what her mysteries are, all of it comes down to education, the writing, the creating and sharing ritual, the art and dance, the sacred sex and sex magic, the temple building. It all kind of connects through this place of educating. So teaching workshops, being present at conferences, leading retreats, creating the Dovecote Seminary, which is part of the Temple of Aphrodite Asteria. And I know that some folks who have already, I know that some of you who are watching this video are already enrolled in, for instance, the Thiosote course, which is the first one. It's sort of the gateway course into that. So that education piece. And this is what my service has looked like. Again, your service may be really different. So how are you being called? What does that look like for you? I'm really, really very curious about this, and I want to connect with you and be able to help you in whatever way I'm able to within this calling for you. And it's not just about the end. There is no end goal, right? Like it is not a an MLM scheme where I'm trying to get everybody to be priestesses. That is not what's happening. If the way that you're being called is to cite or to honor, I want to help you find the resources that you need to do that and to feel fulfilled in doing that. So, if we were live together as this was happening, I would be asking questions and be giving people a chance to ask questions of me. We don't have that opportunity here, so I invite you to take that discussion on to the Discord server, and to talk about how you're being called and what you need in support of that. And yeah, I gotta edit this part. So thank you very much for joining me today in this discussion and for continuing the discussion in those online spaces. And hopefully in some offline, real life, face-to-face spaces coming up in the future. All right. Thank you, beloveds. I'll see you in the next session.